It is the last Sunday of the Christian year, which is usually Christ the King Sunday. And the way it's set up is right as we go into Advent, which is, of course, celebrating God sneaking into history as a person. We kind of look at the very end of the Christian year, the opposite. So it's a time when we kind of celebrate Jesus in all his glory, kind of his cosmic godhood celebrated, the fact that God is in charge. Is kind of what we look at. So the traditional reading we'll look at this week is out of Daniel. It's another kind of apocalyptic vision.
Oh, yay.
Yeah, you like apocalyptic visions. So the section we'll look at is actually about this king, this figure, which obviously we connect with Jesus. But it's just an interesting story. It's a section where Daniel switches over to the first person. Because up until then, it's been telling all the crazy stories, Daniel in the lion's den, the fiery furnace and stuff, and it switches over and starts kind of talking about him having these visions of the future. And it's just a section that I think really catches people's imagination. It starts out with these creatures coming out of the sea. So this, I thought, was just a good illustration. This is like a comic book Bible that Corbin has. So when he first got this book, I remember he sat down and flipped through it, and he totally got stuck on this page, this chapter we're looking at. This is probably your favorite. It's probably your favorite too, Brand, right? The monsters. So I had you guys see the monsters just because they're fascinating, and because that's actually where this
monsters.
It's where this section starts out. It starts Daniel's vision of the four beasts, and so we get the description that I think the comic book has a pretty good picture of them. It's these big weird monsters climbing out of the ocean, and then in contrast to that, to make sure that we recognize something important is going on, Daniel switches actually from talking in kind of normal prose to poetry, and he starts describing getting caught up into heaven. And like all apocalyptic texts, the idea is to kind of contrast what God is up to in history versus what it appears like history is going on, right? It can be pretty easy to feel like God might not be in control with a lot of historical events going on. And the apocalypse is, if they had one big job, I would say it's that, to remind people God's in charge of history. Okay? You okay?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, yeah, what do you got?
Is that where kaiju movies came from?
Those? It's not a bad theory, but I would say it probably comes from the Japanese.
So what chapter are you in?
I am in chapter 7.
Okay.
And I'm starting at verse 9.
Do you already have it?
So as I was watching, so again, we just saw the monsters, and then we're going to switch gears here. And as I was watching, thrones were raised up, and the Ancient One took his seat. His clothes were white like snow, his hair like the lamb's wool. His throne was made of flame, and its wheels blazing fire. A river of fire flowed out of his presence. Thousands upon thousands served him. 10,000 times 10,000 stood ready to serve him. The court sat in session. The scrolls were opened. And as I kept watching, I watched from the moment the horn started bragging. So this, basically, there's a little piece in here about the last of those monsters. It's got like a talking horn on it. But then it says, but its body was killed, destroyed. It was handed over to be burned with fire. Not the Ancient One. God doesn't think much of the big scary monsters, which represent these empires of the world, right? And so we get this moment of this very kind of scary vision of God. He's up in heaven. He's got way more people floating around him. I think a lot of this is supposed to say, look, you want to know what a king looks like? Let me show you a king, right? And we get this crazy vision of God. And God, without even second thought, just sweeps aside this powerful nation that everyone was so impressed with, these big monsters. They're gone. And it's interesting because I think with the point that's trying to be made here about kind of God's kingship versus the world's kingship, you could kind of stop right there, right? And it feels like, okay, good complete story. God showed up, he cleaned the table with these guys, the end. And then the vision continues. But as I continued to watch this night vision of mine, I suddenly saw one like a human being, like a son of man, coming with the heavenly clouds. He came to the Ancient One and was presented before him. Rule, glory, and kingship were given to him. All peoples, nations, and languages will serve and worship him. His rule is an everlasting one. It will never pass away. His kingship is indestructible. And so the phrase there that kind of starts this section off, either my Bible has a human being, you see the Son of Man in a lot of those. It's an idiom at the time that just means a person. It was just the Son of Man, it's the son of a person, not the son of a dog, not the son of a bird, right? It's a person. Like it was such a common phrase, you could almost like put it like dude. And then some dude showed up. It's just a normal way to talk about somebody. Which again, the contrast there between the Ancient of Days whose throne is on fire, and then this dude walks in. And people have been fascinated by this section basically ever from it's written, because it is such a kind of surprising contrast. What is this Son of Man? What is this really common guy doing in this big, crazy, apocalyptic scene, right? And as we're going to go on, people are going to start kind of questioning, like, okay, wait a minute. Something's different about this guy. He might not appear at that way. And I think that's one of the reasons you get the like. The like is very strongly emphasized in the original, right? Someone like a Son of Man. They're like a dude, but something seems a little bit off. The first tip something is off is, you guys notice how this guy showed up? In the heavenly clouds. And that's a very strong tip off that he's associated with God. Either whether you're using like the kind of ancient mythology of the world, if you're using the Bible, clouds are very strongly associated with God's presence. Think about the pillar of fire and cloud, right? Whenever Moses is meeting, a cloud comes down on the thing. There's only one person who rides on clouds in the Psalms. So again, what is this dude doing, waltzing into the presence of the Ancient of Days, riding clouds? Who is this guy? Who does he think he is? And then, as it gets even weirder, rule, kingship, and glory are all given to this guy. And I think we need to remember in Daniel, the visions are pretty literal and practical. Like, yeah, they're big, weird, wild monsters. But in Daniel's mind, it's not like these are symbols of the evils that are in the world, right? They have historical realities. Like, you can decode sections of this. Like, the first monster is probably the Medo-Persian Empire, which is going to come next, which is why they're a composite of these mixed things, right? There's a historical reality hiding behind these kind of images. So when this dude shows up acting like God, Daniel probably understood this is a literal dude, not a symbol of so-and-so, which is the direction a lot of more recent people have tried to take it. Well, it's probably just a symbolic thing. We're not talking about an actual person. But in Daniel, that's a bit of a stretch, because all the other things are talking about literal things and kind of highlighting what they are. And then the universality of it is something else that's really important too, right? There have been a lot of empires at this point, and this is one of the big points Daniel makes. Yeah. You guys all think you are the bee's knees. Now, your empire is going to be the one that sticks around and changes things and lasts, right? And each one of these is going to get pushed aside by somebody else. Each one of these isn't as great as they think it is. And so this statement that this dude is going to show up and his empire is going to last forever. And everybody's going to be there. Not just the people they like, not just the people that are impressive in one way, shape, or form. Everybody's part of this. It's a really unusual claim at this time. It's a very kind of throwing in the face of a lot of other people who like to pretend that they are the ultimate empire at this time. And of course, there's this stickler, depending on the translation, it says that all these people are going to serve him. But a very specific word for serve is used. It has a really strong connotation of worship as well. They're not just going to serve and be under this person. They're going to worship and claim that there's something else, again, for Daniel, as a Jewish person, you don't worship people ever. You don't worship images. You worship God and God alone. So again, who the heck is this guy that shows up? And so just like I think the fact that, you know, this apocalyptic language, the monsters, those things, like just kind of catch your imagination, right? Like, just like the images later in the Bible from Revelation, I've seen them show up in pop culture left and right. The 4 horsemen of the apocalypse or the end of the world. There's just something there that grabs you, right? And this image in the ancient world of this dude showing up with these godlike traits, but he's obviously a person, but he's not just like any other person, really grabbed people's imagination. People pondered for years and years, like, who is this guy? What is going on? What are they going to be like? So a couple of, you know, people that tried rebellions between the testaments tried to claim, oh yeah, you know that thing? That was me. I'm that guy. And then they failed and fell apart. So obviously you weren't that guy. You guys have ever noticed in the Gospels, you know, the number of people that are talking about, are you the Messiah? Is the Messiah around? Like, they were just in, like, they had Messiah fever at that point. There was nothing they wanted more. Yeah, go ahead, Chloe.
It's the smeared one.
The smeared one, that's true. We did talk about what Messiah actually means, right? It means the anointed one, the one who is smeared with oil. Good. But if you guys ever notice that Jesus refers to himself with that phrase, right? It's the way that Jesus talks about himself in the Gospels always. He says, well, the Son of Man did something or other. And it's a really clever way of talking to people because of the connotations. Because again, the word just means a dude. It's a common word. You could have said that about anybody. I'm just a dude. He was just a dude. He's a blue-collar guy, construction worker, right? That no one will be impressed with. This is the last guy anyone is looking for. And yet, this dude with some strong connotations of floating on clouds, of becoming the King of Kings, of becoming all this, that's waiting in the back of people's minds too. And so if you don't like him, you're like, oh yeah, he's just claiming he's some guy. But if you look a little closer, who is he claiming actually to be? And if we look in the Gospels, he tends to use it around a couple of different ideas. He always starts talking about this idea of the Son of Man when he's describing his ministry. What did the Son of Man come to do? To seek and to save the lost. What did the Son of Man come to do? To carry their burdens, to heal blindness, you know, to tell the good news to those in darkness. Is this what any old dude is doing? Is this what this transcendent king figure we've all been waiting for since Daniel had this crazy vision? He's putting a twist on it, right? Because there's this person who sits between them. Yeah, it's this transcendent, amazing figure who is a king. He is claiming all those things. But he heals people. He carries the lost and he carries the broken. It's not kingish stuff that we're expecting. He uses the term heavily when he starts talking about the fact he's headed to the cross and that he's going to suffer. Again, it's not what we're expecting from a king. Just like in that vision, there's this random dude showing up with godlike tendencies in the midst of this glorious, God-type stuff, right? He's playing on both the sides of this expectation, the everyday, the boringness of it, and the hugeness, the glorious of it. But again, when Jesus sits in that place between the two, he points out, like, what is my ministry actually about? Who is my ministry actually about? What's it actually going to look like? It's going to look like suffering. And there are a bunch of sections he uses when he does start talking about kind of where this is all headed. When he's saying, yes, someday the Son of Man is going to be sitting at the right hand of God. We talked about that a little bit last week, right? That God is going to be in charge, that Jesus kicks up his feet at the right hand of God because the work is done, right? And so it's a neat reminder, I think, at the end of the year when we are celebrating the fact that God knows what he's doing in history. Just like he was saying, you know those big scary monsters that for you are going to be these big empires that look absolutely unstoppable and unbeatable. I think we can read that nowadays too. There are things that feel like they are too big, they are too scary. This cannot be beat. And the reminder from many of these sections is God says, no, I'm actually bigger and more powerful. I can handle this. I can bring healing in those things. But don't forget the way I do things. I'm not snapping my fingers and fixing everything. I am someone that no one was impressed with at the time. That people didn't get what I was up to. I hung out with the wrong people. I healed people that were a bunch of losers. I set prisoners free instead of spending my time with the high and mighty. That God, who took on flesh and was poor and lived in a backwater, shows up in these scenes like in Daniel, where God is showing he's in charge of history. And I'm so in charge of history because I've lived history. I've experienced it. I know what it feels like. And yet I'm also powerful enough to actually heal it. Not the easy way, my way. Through my blood, I suffered for this. And I win in the end. I am in charge of history. I can handle whatever life throws your way. I've experienced those frustrations. I loved people. I invited people into a very different and beautiful way of being. And generally, no one wanted it. They killed me for it. And yet, it's still coming. Because I am God, I'm the Ancient of Days, I'm there in that last moment. And so it's a neat passage, I think, showing who this king is. He's everyday, he's boring, he's just some dude who also happens to be God. And in the midst of that glory and that power, and is going to overthrow darkness in each and every form, that's where this story is headed. That's why at the end of the year we celebrate what is coming. We don't see it yet, but it's peeking through in our lives around us if we know where to look. We're celebrating where this story is heading, and then we start over reminding ourselves in the darkest, coldest time of year, theoretically, hard to say in Colorado, God slipped quietly into history as a baby, a helpless baby, amongst a people who had lost hope, who wouldn't understand who he was or what he was up to when he did his ministry. And God changed the world. He redeemed the world, and we're headed towards this kind of ultimate victory when things are the way God dreams and desires, and things are the way we dream and desire as well. So that's our cosmic Christ. That's our dude from Daniel.